Joy in suffering is one of my favorite topics, and it's so mysterious and so common among all the saints that they are able to unite their suffering to the cross of Christ joyously. Okay, where does this joy come from? Sure, Saint Therese, I bet you just loved freezing your butt off in the French convent and like not even crossing your ankles to keep your feet warm a little bit. But like, I'm sure you just loved having tuberculosis. I'm sure, St. Lawrence, you just love being barbecued alive. Like sometimes we, read these things and just can't believe it. Like, yeah, I'm sure, that sounds like a good time to me. Like, yeah, like we can't really, accept how it's possible that the saints enjoyed these things. And it's not enjoying in the sense that we enjoy a hot dog. The pleasure that comes from, the joy that comes from suffering, obviously is not what equatable with sensory pleasure. It is not the same kind of thing. It's also not purely intellectual. It is also not merely that they just have heard and memorize and understand and agree with the theology that when you suffer for Jesus, you are consoling his heart and saving souls. Merely remembering that tends, in my experience, not to make suffering joyful. That is an intellectual conviction that is true and good and awesome, but it is not sufficient to transform the direct experience of suffering into joy. So what is that? How does that come about? I was reading one of my favorite books of all time called Joy and Suffering. It's a little pink book by Bishop A.A. Nozer, based on the writings of St. Therese. It's a novena to St. Therese and involves a collection of things that she has said arranged in a particular way around this theme of joy and suffering, which she was such a master of. And on page 36 of this little pink book, there is a sentence attributed to St. Therese that I think everybody has skipped over, and it might be one of the most important sentences in her entire body of work. This is just my opinion, of course, but I'm just so moved and impressed by this. I feel her looking at me through my poster of her over there. Anyway, she says, and I quote, "I have always forced myself to love suffering." I'm pretty sure those are her exact words. I'm going to write them down so that they are here, even though I'm saying other things with my mouth. I have always forced myself to love suffering. Why is this so important? Well, one reason is the ability to find joy in suffering, to have a sensible love of suffering, tends to be described as a great grace only given to certain souls. In a way, of course, this may be true. However, Saint Therese says she has always forced herself to love suffering, which means there is an effort that she exerted to receive and develop this grace that, in theory, we all ought to be able to exercise. We can all exercise our wills in the same way. We can all force ourselves to love suffering. And here's what I mean by that. Okay, well, I don't want to get right into like the step-by-step exercisey bit immediately. I think I had more to say first. To elaborate on this, Saint Therese, is so impressive, so much because of her ability to find joy in suffering. And that experience is so rarely replicated, it seems, and I don't think it has to be rare. I think it could be very common. maybe not to the degree that Saint Therese mastered it, but I think finding joy in suffering could be a very daily, possibly even continuous activity and mode of being and practice for Catholics. And wouldn't that just be pretty awesome? So here's how I think we can take the path that Saint Therese walked so far on and make it part of any lay Catholic's diet in a way that is totally analogous, practicable, not overwhelming, and helps us to develop the sensible love of suffering of the same kind that Saint Therese had, so that suffering does not bother us in the same way. We do find the joy in it, and we just crack this nut that everyone has been telling us is just reserved for saints in the 6th and 7th mansions. Forget that. I think we can have it. I think we can work on it every day without killing ourselves at all. Here's how. Here's how. Oh boy, I'm finally going to talk about it. All right. So, here's an exercise. Exercise number 1. We have suffering in life. It comes to us. For example, I'm making a video and I have to let my cat in the room because he's a good boy. And he doesn't like it when I close the door because he is the master of the house. Yes, buddy, I can't talk right now. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we have suffering that comes to us. Headaches, illnesses, annoying bosses, loud people in our lives, unruly this and that, traffic. I mean, I really do not have to list examples of suffering. I'm sure you're quite familiar with them. But here's what I recommend for the first exercise, and that is, whenever you find yourself suffering, even if it's something small, just make a 10-second effort amid this suffering to love that suffering. Sitting in traffic, being frustrated, just take 10 seconds to will yourself to say, I love this. And when you're willing, I should explain what it means to will oneself to love something a little bit. So to will to love, what does this mean? There are a few different ways you can think about this. I'm trying to describe an interior experience that is real, but different ways of describing it will make more sense to different people. So I'm going to describe it a few different ways. Just take what you like and leave the rest. So the will is like an exertion. You are sort of grunting and going, ugh, like as if you're lifting a weight. It should feel like an effort. That's normal. What are you grunting about? Well, you can grunt and force yourself to be grateful for a thing. Gratitude is sort of a way. Will and gratitude is sort of a way to will to love something. Appreciation, which is more like looking for the good within it, believing, affirming, asserting, out of faith and trust that there is something good in this, and willing oneself to appreciate it. Wow, this bee sting, the sensations of this bee sting are, I believe that God has something good in these sensations for me. I'm going to penetrate this with my appreciation. I'm going to appreciate this, even though I'm not quite exactly sure what I'm appreciating yet. I'm just going to shine this beam of appreciation onto the sensations, trusting that they will reach something genuine at some point. Genuineness, speaking of genuineness. So you're willing toward genuineness. maybe I have this bee sting. I don't like it. It's suffering. And if I say I love this, or I appreciate this, or I'm thankful for this, I feel like I'm lying. It feels not genuine. So what I can will then, what I can grunt in the direction of, is honesty. Thank you, God, for this. I'm going to will myself to mean it as much as I can. And so these are practices. To will something that does not present itself naturally. It's very easy to appreciate something that is obviously face value wonderful in every way. That is a genuine outpouring of gratitude and appreciation. But in order to develop our palate, in order to develop a taste for these things that are difficult to appreciate, such as suffering, exercising our will in this direction makes that easier. What happens over time is you build up this will to love suffering. You build it up like a muscle. At first, you can only lift a little bit. You can do 10 seconds of fake, inauthentic, non-genuine appreciation of suffering that is like below a level 5 of suffering. You can do 10 seconds of fake level 5 and below. And then maybe you can do 20. Or maybe you can do 10 seconds of level 6 suffering. Or maybe you can do 10 seconds of level 5 suffering and really mean it. Like, there are ways in which this becomes easier, it becomes more honest, it becomes more natural, it becomes stronger. And the genuine love of suffering starts to build in you like a muscle. Now, I'm talking about this as though I'm really good at it. That is not the case. I have been playing with this for a little while, but I've only seen enough progress to know that there is something there. I'm pretty sure that there is something to this. So as you experiment with this, I will be experimenting with it right alongside you. Another way of willing to love something, or another way of conceiving of willing to love, is blessing. The will to bless. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas, defines love as willing the good of the other. If I have a bee sting, I say, bless you, I will your good. I am not trying to eradicate you, I'm talking the bee sting. I will the good of these sensations that hurt. I will their good. I will that they deliver the message to my soul that they are here to deliver, because God ordained them to be here right now. I'm sure that He has a purpose. I don't need to know what it is in order to know that it is a good thing because it has come from the hand of God. And just willing ourselves to bless something that we might be more naturally inclined to curse is another way of willing to love. So the whole practice here is willing ourselves to love the sufferings that come to us from the hand of God. I'm not saying go out and whip yourself, go get hit by a car, go give yourself tuberculosis. I'm not saying any of those things. Just the suffering that arises naturally. Practice, like weightlifting, willing ourselves to love those sufferings a bit at a time. Just whatever you can easily handle in a day, because you will feel, I believe, the muscle growing within yourself, especially if you do this every single day. Just 10 seconds a day. What else? Okay. So, another important distinction to make here, I sort of risk going off topic, but this is important. An important distinction to make is it's important to point out in any experience is pretty much composed of two things, especially suffering experiences, composed of two things: thoughts and sensations. This is super important and super practical. Thoughts are of the mind, they're of the imagination, they are of interpretation of what's going on right now. They could be right or wrong, so they are uncertain. Let's leave it there for now. Sensations, by contrast, are located somewhere in the body. They are not imagined, they are actually there. They're there. Let's say like physical reality. They're really there. Like, even if you have phantom limb syndrome and you're imagining that you have a third arm that you don't have and it hurts, you are feeling it. The sensations are real. Maybe the third arm isn't real, but the sensations are real. You cannot dispute that. Interpretation. Okay, so whereas thoughts are a matter of interpretation, sensations are not. Sensations are what they are. Are what they are. They require no interpretation. And also they are certain. Sensations are not right or wrong, they simply are what they are. You cannot, if you are seeing a red sky, no one can tell you you aren't. That is your sensation. It may not be objectively correct, but that does not matter right now. The point is, that is the sensation you are having. Why is this super, 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 super important? It's because when we are suffering, dealing with our suffering at the level of our thoughts tends to go really, really badly. It tends to go badly. For example, if I am angry, my thoughts will tell me, oh, you should get revenge on that guy, you're too good to suffer this right now, you don't deserve blah, 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 you should have blah, blah, blah a long time ago, and I'm gonna have an ice cream cone. You know, like the thoughts that the emotion gives us have nothing to do with reality, have nothing to do with virtue. They're not even our thoughts. These are not the thoughts that we would have if we were not angry. These are the thoughts of the emotion itself, trying to perpetuate its relevance and like get a moment in the sun. It's almost like a micro-possession. It's almost like being possessed temporarily by a spirit of anger that then speaks through our body and tries to get us to act on its behalf. This is not really us. This is a bunch of nonsense that is the exclusive domain and serves the exclusive interest of this spirit of anger that is temporarily trying to get us to obey it. So the thoughts that occur when we are upset are not relevant at all. They have nothing to do with reality. They're not there to serve us. They suck, ignore them, go away. The sensations, however, are real. These are things that are not subject to interpretation. Nobody, like the Pope cannot tell me that my bee sting doesn't hurt. Like, I don't have a bee sting, but if I did, there's no authority, there's no moral authority that could tell me that I'm not feeling what I'm feeling. Like, I have an indisputable vantage when it comes to that. And now, if I start thinking about it and go, well, this bee sting is a sign that I really should become a Freemason, well, then I'm wrong. I'm going with the thoughts. I'm dealing with this in the wrong category of the experience. But if I deal with it on the level of sensations, that is where the cross actually is. That's where the nails actually hit the man. The sensations are the side or the aspect of the experience of suffering where our attention ought to go in order to deal with it, in order to carry the cross, in order to love suffering, suffer well, metabolize suffering, make it fruitful. We have to stay in the sensations. A lot of exorcists also point out that the devil has far more access to our minds and our thoughts and our imaginations than to our bodies. It's far more common for demons to possess with and oppress and mess with our minds and our imaginations and these sort of ephemeral up here things than for a demon to fully occupy our body and make us walk around and kill people. That is like super, super rare. So the sensation is the place of safety. It is the place of reality. It is the place of fruitful encounters with suffering. So whenever you're like stuck in your head or ruminating on a problem that you can't solve, that's frustrating, or upset in any way, the best move tends to be to orient entirely our attention toward the sensations of that experience. This is where the suffering is going to actually resolve. You pay attention to the sensations, you love them, you let them be what they are, and then they will stop spitting all these stupid thoughts at you. When I'm angry, I have all these thoughts and all these sensations, my heart is burning, my blah, 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 blah. You feel what it's like, but if I ignore the thoughts and feel the sensations fully and deeply, they tend to resolve into peace. And then the thoughts go away because I'm back to myself. I've asserted, real reality over anger reality successfully. Another reason it is safe to ignore the thoughts is that after you have embraced the cross and felt through the sensations and found peace with or on the other side of them, then you can still think. There is nothing about anger that improves one's reasoning so much that when one is not angry, one cannot do a better job. So you're not missing out on anything by saving the thinking until you are calm. Saving the thinking and the calculating and the planning and the deciding until the upset has been resolved. So ignore the thoughts, feel the sensations. How does this tie into love of suffering and joy in suffering? The sensations are the ideal focal point for our will to love. When we're suffering about something, and I say practice gratitude, practice appreciation, practice genuineness, practice blessing, it refers to the sensations of that suffering. That should make sense now. I've explained it pretty thoroughly. All right, so this is exercise number 1. Will yourself to love these things. Moving on a little bit. Well, I'm going to explain a little bit more. So, the reason that saints are able to love suffering is because they are seeing reality. They are seeing the reality of the beauty and goodness of God's will, which includes for them suffering in that moment. So what they are doing is not only loving suffering. Yes, they're doing that. But what they are also doing is seeing reality accurately. They have penetrated the illusion that suffering is unpleasant. They have seen past the prickly wrapping paper that God has put on this gift that He's trying to give us, as everything He tries to give us is a gift. So one can also conceive of joy and suffering as seeing reality accurately. This helps explain why the exercise of loving suffering, of willing oneself to love, I should remember this, in the sense of gratitude, appreciation, blessing, genuineness. This is why these things can pay off, because every little bit of ground you gain in one of these areas is ground you will have next time. It becomes something that you can then rest upon. When you assert, okay, when this is like fake it till you make it, but it's more like real it till you feel it. Because this is a real thing. You're not faking anything. What you're doing is agreeing with a reality that you cannot see so that you become more able to see it. If you're faking something, like fake it till you make it is not a good description of this, because when you fake it, you are accustoming yourself to an illusion. This is the opposite. This is accustoming oneself to reality. And the fact that it takes effort and doesn't come naturally does not mean that it's any less real. So when you are willing yourself to love something, what you are really simultaneously doing is willing yourself to see reality as it really is, and not just as it first appears. We are not really so responsible in a certain respect for how reality first appears to us. We are born to a long line of sinful parents, we live in a sinful world, stuff comes in, we're babies, we don't know anything, we start to see reality as we see it, as a big, massive coping mechanism that we then have to go back once we become adults and undo, work our way through. So in a certain sense, we are not that responsible for how reality at first appears to us. But we are responsible for undoing it, and that is why practicing willing ourselves to see reality more clearly is so important. I hope this makes sense, because when you assert something that is real and acclimate yourself to something that is real, the first time it's hard, but the second time you can sort of lean against the experience of the first time. So this is something that compounds and becomes easier and becomes more natural because it is real, because you are leaning back and relying on a thing that is actually there. You are not building a facade of convenient illusions in order to enhance some aspect of your personality or something like that. Here's an example of what I mean. Ear training, musicians. Some people are born with an excellent sense of pitch and can tell the difference between two notes that are very close to each other, but not exactly the same. They are perceiving a real difference that is there. Some people are born without that sensitivity and are not very good at knowing exactly where a note is or perceiving a difference between two very slightly different notes. This is like having a good ear versus having a bad ear. The fact that one person is born not being able to tell that difference does not mean that the person who does have that sensitivity is wrong. Your inability to perceive something does not mean people who can perceive it are incorrect. The even better news is that the person born without this sensitivity can, through acts of will, develop that sensitivity. And even though it doesn't come naturally to them, as they develop that sensitivity, they start to realize, this is real. There is a universe here that I was not born naturally seeing. So it is with joy and suffering. When we exert ourselves toward the reality that suffering, when coming from the hand of God, is good, when we exert that reality, we come to see that it is real. And the fact that it takes effort does not mean that we are being inauthentic or faking anything at all. It is quite the opposite. We are developing a skill that people more skillful than us really do have, and that it really does benefit us to have. So I hope that makes sense. There's every reason to exercise oneself toward the love of suffering, toward joy and suffering, like St. Therese herself admittedly did. That quote from the beginning, I have always forced myself to love suffering. I am going to find that book, and I'm going to hold up the page, And I'm going to point to page 36 of that book where it says that. I'll put the book downstairs. I don't have it right now, but I'm going to get it. All right, moving on to exercise number 2. It's a little bit more advanced. It kind of builds on the first exercise. Once you have that down and start to feel inside yourself the mechanism we're talking about, then you can consider going on to this next thing. Exercise number 2. We all, if you're watching this video, you probably kind of want to be a martyr in some way. There is some part of you that admires martyrs and goes, man, I wish I could do that. Like, even if you don't want to be burned at the stake like Joan of Arc, you understand and appreciate the glory of it and go, man, that's cool. I want to be like that person. At the very least, like, you see the goodness of it. So, I have good news for you. There's a certain kind of the world's easiest martyrdom available to you, and that is this. You have suffered in the past suffering. There is suffering in the past that sucked. Thank God it's over. And now we resent it. You try not to think about it. You try to avoid it happening again. You work on forgiving the people that did it to you, or the circumstances, or God, or yourself. And you remember, back in your life, how much that suffering was. And darn it, I'm glad it's not that time anymore. Me too, believe me. But the martyrdom that is available to all of us right now, without being burned at the stake, is going back carefully and cautiously and judiciously and prudently into these memories of past suffering and willing ourselves to love those, extracting the good that God wrapped up in those sufferings, willing ourselves to see the reality that suffering is good, using the tactics that I described a minute ago in exercise number 1. If a girl broke my heart when I was 16, which is probably true, I can go back into that memory, feel the pain of it, feel these sensations of it, not go into my head and start going, oh, well, she should have been blah, 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 this was no fair. Just go into the sensations of it and will myself to bless, appreciate, and genuinely find gratitude for these sensations that are in my heart right now. And by doing that, I am willing myself to penetrate the illusion that suffering is bad, that God hurt me, that this was an objectively negative thing from which I can draw no benefit. Those things are all false. I have to penetrate by the sheer force of will and faith and trust and love the illusion that the suffering was bad. All of the suffering of the rest of our life is the fodder for the martyrdom that we don't even have to relive. All we have to do to draw the martyrdom level benefit from it, I suspect here, is will ourselves to love it and metabolize the sufferings that we've already been through. Digest them in the way that God would have us digest them. See them as the good that God would have us see them as, and therefore make peace with them. Not resent those people anymore. Forgive them. Let go of anxiety about it happening again in the future. Stop worrying about that. Stop trying to avoid that. Stop mapping your life out in order to sidestep things that look like landmines from the past. But most of all, we receive the gifts of the suffering that God had for us in those, that we just weren't mature enough to digest in this divine way at the time. So if you want to be a martyr, but you don't feel like dying, by the guillotine today, you can still carefully and judiciously go back into sufferings of the past and love them as though they were present. Do not re-traumatize yourself. I am not saying that if you are a war vet, you have to go right into the foxhole immediately. I'm saying, like last week, if you had a fight with your wife and you're still a little mad, start bite-sized. Definitely be careful and smart about this. But it seems to me, in theory, that if we can metabolize our present sufferings in the way that Saint Therese did, in willing herself to love suffering, then we can do that with all the suffering of our past lives and receive the full benefit and perfection of those and see what God has been doing for us all this time and receive the fruit of it that we can then carry with us into the future. We can allow the suffering of the past that we couldn't appreciate at the time to perfect us in the present. I'm pretty sure I've got more on this. Metabolism of suffering. I want to talk about this. I just mentioned, I've been using this metaphor of unwrapping the gift. That concept comes from, among the many other places, the Hebrew or Yiddish term tzimtzum, which means concealment. Tzimtzum. Concealment. That God conceals himself and invites us to discover him, invites us to find him in his concealed condition. And what could make God happier than for us to find him in his most concealed form, which is the worst sufferings and the most unfair sufferings, particularly the ones that we are personally the least talented in dealing with. If we can penetrate the concealment, the appearance of God giving us this big, poop to munch on, penetrate the appearance of that poop and get to the golden divine gift inside through willing ourselves to love it before we can even tell what it is, that makes God very happy. And I have a bit of anecdotal evidence from my own life for that. It is, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'm just going to call this metabolism of suffering, because this refers to getting out of suffering what God intends to give us through suffering, metabolism of suffering. Because I think this is really where happiness, where something important comes from, metabolism of suffering. It's not merely that saints suffered a lot, but that they metabolized their suffering really well. They got out of it what God put into it, what God intended to deliver to them through it. They received the benefit, they digested and extracted the benefit of the suffering. They didn't merely survive it. Tons of people have survived a lot of suffering that did not make them into saints. They just suffered a lot and then died. Fulton Sheen says that the great tragedy in the world is not all the suffering, but all of the wasted suffering. People do not know what to do with it. This is part of solving that problem. So, metabolism of suffering. When I moved across the country, the last thing I did was I flew back to California to pick up my cat that my wife and I have and who invaded this very talk a little while ago. He's a good boy, and we wanted to bring him to the new house in a comfortable way. He was just not going to be ready for a multi-day road trip. So I picked him up at my parents' house, and I put him in a carrying case and brought him onto the cabin of the plane with me. I bought a pet pass or something and brought him with me. And he is not used to being in that little carrying case more than like half an hour, but it was a 5-hour flight, a security line, picking up luggage on the other side. It was like an 8 or 9 hour can't leave the case for him. He's never done that before. In all these unfamiliar places with weird people waving, electromagnetic wands and making announcements and loud engines going. He's just not a happy camper. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm sitting on the plane with my poor sweet cat who is mad at me for not letting him out. And I think a kitty's meows are just very sad sounding. So I think he's sad. I think he's trying to poop but can't. I think he's like constant. I'm just so worried. I am dying. This is another reason that I am not naturally inclined to have children. It's just because the amount of concern and vulnerability to their issues is just strikes me as overwhelming. I could hardly handle flying my cat across America one time. And so he's whining, making all this noise. I'm by myself, cannot calm him down. And it's suffering. It is a cross for me. It was bad. But I remembered all this stuff. And I exerted my will when I had the energy and when I could to love this. The sensations of nervousness and grief and embarrassment that I'm on the flight and my cat's probably bugging people and I'm freaking out and can't help anything. I just take a moment when I can to bless this experience and thank God for it. And after and even during that flight, I ended up understanding very many more aspects of my life more clearly through the metaphor of something that happened on that flight. For example, I understood that very often I am the cat in the box on the plane because God, a much more intelligent being, is moving me through this unfamiliar territory to a happy destination. And I do not understand the process, and I have never seen the destination, and I am uncomfortable and scared and whiny. And God is the one who is absorbing that. So like the same relation I had to my cat, God has to me. And so now I can see why St. Therese says, how much God must love us to send us such sublime sufferings, or something like that. That I love my cat enough to suffer so that he can get to our new house. So if God is willing to put me through difficulties in order to bless me with the new house, with the promised land, with the future that he has prepared for me, how much he must love me. Because here I am suffering on the plane for my cat, and there God is suffering on the cross for me. When we are engaged in the same activity, this purely analogous, beautiful activity. And I have an inner conviction or intuition that this metaphor came to me because I loved the suffering, because I, at least to an extent, unwrapped the prickly gift of that suffering. I willed myself to love it, I willed myself to bless it, I willed myself to be grateful to God for it. And the fruits of that were not only that the suffering was more pleasant in this joy and suffering kind of a way, but it was literally fruitful in delivering graces to me of a purely intuitive, intellectual nature. To say that there is fruit in suffering is not just a mystical platitude. It's literally true, and in a variety of ways that certainly has astounded me so far. So this seems like a very important, powerful, high ROI, high return on investment exercise and activity, an area of life to focus on, which is why I took I wanted to lay it out today. So I hope all this makes sense. Thank you so much for watching all this. It's about all I have to say for now. And please let me know what you think. Send me some questions. And please try this. 10 seconds a day of willing yourself to love whatever suffering you have going on right now. God bless you. Thank you so much. Saint Therese, pray for us. Amen.